Our next guest is Darragh McGinley, who is a former social digital manager at the FAI from 2015 to 2018. Is that right, Darragh? They're the 3 years you worked for the FAI?
Yeah, if you were talking in terms of senior international matches, my first game would have been the first one after the Bosnia playoff, and my last one would have been Martin O'Neill's last game, so the end of 2018.
Okay, so a good long period of time. What does the... Good morning to you, by the way, and thanks for taking the call. What does the social digital manager at the FAI do?
There's various different initiatives across the FAI, so I would have worked from all the grassroots initiatives that the development officers would have run, 52 of them I think it was across the country, and then promotion of the League of Ireland and the Women's National League, as well as the international teams from under 15 up to senior international. So in terms of my dealings with the senior team, I would have been travelling home and away with them and working with them on their social media, assisting with media interviews, be it with yourselves or anything else, and then education on social media. And if there's any issues, then I would be in a position to assist them. In terms of the education with the senior team, a lot of them would get a huge amount of education with their clubs, but we would do at the FAI, I would have done a huge amount of education with the underage players in particular, because they may or may not know what they're getting themselves into on social media. It can be a very positive place, but in the situation that we've seen here, it can also be very negative. And players who are not aware of negative comments that they may get, where I was there as a support for them and would then help them with that in reporting and hopefully getting either accounts taken down or users removed from social channels.
Okay, so it's a very broad and busy job. From an international perspective, then you would have worked with international teams at all age groups. So, and just to reiterate the point, the senior team, I presume, you know, they all have had media training baked into getting to the point where you're good enough to play international football. Whatever club you've come through, there's a press office there and multiple people working in it who would have conversations with you. You'd have an agent. A lot of them would have had agents as well who would have at least kind of had some sense of, okay, this is what's going to happen. Maybe before we get to the situation with Cyrus, talk to us about the underage teams, because I suspect that actually your job there is even more important. It's less high profile, but it's an earlier opportunity for you to get into that conversation and say, look, this has the potential to get bad quickly. You should, I mean, in an ideal world it wouldn't, but there might be some stuff that you're not going to like. Do you have any examples of that?
You're trying to educate them that these guys, when they come into the international setup at under 15, they're on a pedestal that they wouldn't have been on before. So it's educating them that they need to be responsible as to what they're doing, that in some cases people will be jealous of them and they'll want to knock it. You don't want to be doom and gloom and say social media is a big scary thing. It can be quite positive, but yes, there are trolls there, and people can players can put very silly things up there. So, as you say, education at clubs is a big thing, but a lot of the younger players wouldn't be at professional clubs, and they wouldn't be at clubs that would have press officers or social media managers for their age group. So that was generally a challenge. So, in terms of examples that you mentioned, I would have done 2 European Championship finals with the under-17 team with Ireland. We would have done extensive media training with them ahead of the tournament. And I would actually just have asked for a show of hands as to who has done media training. And I think each time there was 2 players and they were at high-level clubs in England, so no one else had done anything. And a lot of naive things were done, to be honest, and you'd have to pull a player aside and say, don't be doing that, take it down. But overall, yeah, the education was there from under 15 up, and you're just trying to help them and make sure they don't do something where they regress. So if they say something silly, they can't then come back and say, well, I didn't know. Education is a huge thing, and if we educate them on the kind of do's and don'ts and what's appropriate when you're an international footballer, I think that's a positive.
That makes perfect sense. And like, you know, lest anybody think we're victim blaming here, this is just the other side of what happens before you go out into the big bad world, and what happens when you're in the big bad world actually happens. The point about racists and trolls is that they don't actually distinguish between the under-17 team and the senior team. There's no kind of bell in their head that goes off and goes, oh, you've reached a certain point now, I'm going to abuse you because you know, because I can. They're like, you're playing for Ireland, you're fair game. And I suspect the under-17 team was getting stuff that doesn't really come to media attention, but that is as bad as anything else that people are getting?
Yeah, it's and how do you talk to a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old when they're getting comments like you're not Irish, you go home to your country or whatever, and these guys are born and bred Irish. It's not right. And in terms of in my role as a social media manager, you can straight away you say, well, I hope he's a minority. We love you. You're part of our team. Try and ignore it. But what I can do in my role is that I can take that account. Your options are limited. You can report a tweet, let's say for Twitter, for example. A report goes through to Twitter. They will review it. I don't know if it's a bot or it's a person.
Sorry, Dara, like anybody can report a tweet. Do you have, because you're involved with a high-profile organisation like the FAI, do you have any superpowers? Like when you hit report tweet, is it any different from me hitting report tweet or anybody else hitting report tweet?
Yes, so just to give the example then of that process, the first step I have to take is report it. If it doesn't come down, then I have a direct report. And that is only a direct report because I went and worked to get one, because this issue was happening too often. And I said, if a report is coming back and saying this doesn't breach, Cyrus mentioned yesterday, our terms of service or free speech on Twitter again as an example, then you're thinking that something has slipped through the net. So then I set up a meeting myself with the PR communications department in the social media networks. I gave them examples of the issues that we were having, that these were high profile accounts, that not just that it's high profile account, it shouldn't happen to anyone.
Yeah.
And that if this happens again, I need to get this down quick, because it's doing serious damage to players, and it's not right in society. So as a result, then they were helpful at times, but if you're playing a match abroad and you're emailing someone at 11 p.m. at night, it's going to be up the guts of a day before it comes down, and sadly at times there the damage is done. The
damage is done is the point, isn't it? Because as Cyrus Christie pointed out yesterday, it was actually, he'd seen it and was almost letting it go, was making the usual accommodation that he has to make with it. And James McLean highlighted it, and actually then it becomes an issue. And ultimately it doesn't become an issue that is dealt with in a way that is fulfilling. And here we are still talking about it a couple of years later. And maybe actually, you know, when this happens, we do need to be talking about it a bit more. Can you talk to us a bit about the scale of this, Dara? Like, I'm beginning to get a sense that actually this happens to any players who look in any way slightly different who play for Ireland, and that it happens to all of them all the time.
I listened to your interview yesterday, and the training ground incident surprised me, and I wasn't aware of the Garda side of it, because I had finished that stage. But the sad thing is that I wasn't surprised. This has happened numerous occasions. Cyrus had mentioned the Denmark game was the big one, but there were games before that. I remember we were in Tbilisi airport. That was the September before the Denmark playoffs, so 2 months before it. Cyrus pulled me aside and said, look at these messages I'm getting. Straight away, they were of a racist nature. Straight away, as you said yesterday, it's a difficult conversation. You're consoling someone, and it's not nice. So straight away there, I'm getting on to the contacts in each of the social media networks and saying that this has happened again. Please help us, and please get it down, and please ban this person. But there's no the action probably that is needed is that it's too easy to set up a social media account. There's the same person that gets banned can set up a new email and they're up. Whereas if I wanted to set up, let's say, a betting account in Ireland, I need to submit a government ID, a passport or a driving license. And I think that if we're going to try and take this seriously and to get to a stage where we can take action against trolls, as you say, that are causing these incidents, then there needs to be accountability, and it needs to be easier to trace them, because at the moment you need to be tracking IP addresses and they can be hidden easily, whereas if you're submitting an ID with your account, then you're easily traceable. And as Cyrus said, the Gardaí don't appear to have a specific department for this type of thing, so it's difficult for them as well. But I do think that a good first step would be IDs have to be there to set up an account.
It definitely feels like the social networks need to be more proactive about this. And again, now is a very interesting moment in their history where there is an opportunity, there is a groundswell of support, and I actually think it would increase the value of their platforms if everybody knew that you were being yourself on it, because then you're not going to be racially abused. Or if you are going to be racially abused, at least that person is revealing themselves to be a racist, as opposed to hiding behind an egg or a Twitter handle with loads of numbers in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing as well, people may not be aware, but when I was involved, I would help players with verifications of, for in layman's terms, that's the blue tick you see beside people's names. To get that process done, you need to submit an ID. So the process is there. They have the software to approve this, to hold these images in stock as well. So it's a case of scaling it. Can they scale it? Do they want to scale it? I hope they do, because it will make a huge difference, and hopefully we'll be able to stamp issues like this out in the future.
One last thing, the Black Lives Matter movement obviously has been around for years, but, and it was something we spoke about with Cyrus, there's a need for it not to just become like the poppy in November, or like the pre-match handshake, or the FIFA Fair Play stuff, or the no to racism ads that were on before the Champions League. The company that you work for now is actually in the vanguard of making something meaningful and saying we're going to do something about this and we're going to be involved in this. Yeah,
my current role is the social media manager with Indeed, so they're the #1 job site in Ireland and globally. As part of that role, we have a couple of sponsorships, one of which is Team Ireland for the Olympics, to supporting the athletes there. Another is the main sponsorship of Eintracht Frankfurt in the Bundesliga. So Germany will be a huge market for Indeed, and that part of my remit will be working with them. So once each season, we have an opportunity to take our logo off the jersey and put something on it. This year we did a place for diversity, and we combined the national flags of the 22 different nationalities of the players, put it on the jersey and said place for diversity. Now, we had another opportunity for the German Cup semi-final against Bayern Munich to put Black Lives Matter on it. The club approached us. We have a vice president of diversity inclusion who can educate us to do these things correctly in the right taste and the right manner, and make sure it's done for the right reasons. So we knew that this game was going to be on TV globally when there was no other football on TV. It was over 8 million watched this game against Bayern Munich, and we basically put Black Lives Matter on the jersey, did various initiatives around us to help promote the campaign, and hopefully we were able to use our sponsorship to reach and engage and educate people on what is a vitally important matter.
Tara, thanks a million for joining us this morning. It's good for us to get an insight into what the players are actually doing, and a little bit how powerless in some ways the FAI are on a micro level. I mean, obviously it would be great if the organisation brought more to bear. Aona Reardon had a good suggestion there that any of the organisations that get public money need to be seen to be anti-racist to justify the public funding, and there's definitely a conversation around that. And it's not a stick to beat the FAI or the GA or the IRFU with, but it is a moment where you can kind of come together and say, look what's happening to your players. We actually have an opportunity to be thought leaders on this.
Yeah, totally agree. There's been work done, but there's a lot more that can be done across the board, and hopefully incidents like what we've seen with Cyrus don't happen again.
Darren McGinley, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. A reminder, OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. At 8:48, let's bring in the newspapers this morning.
OTB AM.